Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topic with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Libya's eastern-based parliament speaker signed a law allowing a presidential election to take place in December. Though another body of state rejected the move, saying that the legislation was flawed. Meanwhile, the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, has offered to support Libya to ensure the necessary stability in the country. Can the elections be held in December? And how important is the role of the international community? Lebanese leaders agreed a new government after a year of political feuding over cabinet seats that has exacerbated a devastating economic collapse. Prime Minister Najib Mikati and President Michel Aoun signed a decree establishing the government in the presence of Nabi Berri, the Speaker of Parliament. Will this new government be the solution for the political crisis in the country, causing an economic collapse? And Turkey has so far administered over 100 million coronavirus vaccine jabs as part of its nationwide immunisation campaign. Turkey is scheduled to achieve herd immunity this autumn, depending on vaccine supplies and people's willingness to get vaccinated. But what are the reasons behind Turkey's successful fight against the coronavirus pandemic? And these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. On the 5th of February, Libya's rival political groups agreed in United Nations-mediated talks to form an interim and unity government to lead the country to elections this December. Our following infographic explains the process. The European Union has offered support to Libya ahead of the country's December elections, which look to mark a new era in the country's history.
The EU says it strongly supports the implementation of a ceasefire and the withdrawal of all foreign forces from Libya, while Tripoli calls on the EU to play a larger and more vital role in the country. The EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, visited Libya this week and met Libyan Foreign Minister Najla Mangoush in Tripoli. Borrell said that he was committed to helping the Libyan government reform the security sector.
But looking to the longer term, the European Union would like to offer Libya the large expertise we developed, supporting many partners, rebuilding their state structures during their transition. We are ready to put in place an extensive capacity-building program to help Libya strengthen its institutions at central, local level, if requested.
For her part, Mangoush said that Borrell's visit to Libya aims to support the government of national unity and the country in general. Borrell arrived on Wednesday to hold talks with officials in Libya, as the Libyans are seeking to reach a set of consensus on the constitutional basis within which presidential and parliamentary elections will be held at the end of this year.
And to discuss the latest situation in Libya, we're joined live from Istanbul by Abdul Qadir Assad, who's an analyst and journalist. Abdul Qadir, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge.
No, thanks for having me.
Can you update us? What is the latest situation? There's been in Libya. There's been a hive of activity with diplomatic missions going to visit. Well, what's the latest, particularly with respect to the EU's visit?
Well, actually, as you've said in the report, the EU's top chief of foreign affairs and policy, Borrell, visited Libya actually, but not for achieving a breakthrough in the political stalemate or pushing forward the elections that are going to be held hopefully in December. No, actually the EU is very inefficient in terms of politics in Libya as far as Libya is concerned, but they are pushing to keep the Operation Irene in the Mediterranean alive, and that's why the EU is actually active and having a role in Libya. They care about the illegal immigration issue and keeping Operation Irene up and going more than pushing forward Libya elections, and that has been the case since actually the start of the split in 2014, when they had Operation Sophia instead of Operation Irene. So actually, I wouldn't put so much hope into the EU's suggestion or proposal of support to the Libyan elections, because they are actually inefficient when it comes to politics in Libya.
Well, we've seen from other examples of the EU that their first goal is to enhance the EU. So I could quite understand what you're saying there. So what is it, though, that they are said to have offered to Libya in terms of support? Because Joseph Borrell himself said that we're behind Libya. What do you think he meant by that? Or, as you just suggested, is this just a form of words to keep the conversation going?
Well, actually, one thing it is actually to keep the conversation going. And the other thing is just to reiterate to the international community and the United Nations that the EU is in line with the efforts of pushing elections forward. So Borrell just, said the usual things, that the EU will always support the new Libyan interim executive authority, which is the Government of National Unity and the Presidential Council, and the High National Elections Commission to move forward in preparing for December elections. Now we have a little bit more than 100 days until we reach elections, 110 days or something, and the EU is trying to show the international community that it is working in line of the UN resolutions, the Berlin 1 and 2 conferences, conclusions. So they just are reiterating their position just to show that they are in line. That's what I think, that because on the ground, they don't have anything to help with, Libya with. Libya now is split again, actually, because of so many issues that have come to the surface lately, especially the latest parliamentary election law that has been unilaterally issued by the House of Representatives, actually, in eastern Libya. So the EU is, actually not that efficient when it comes to, helping Libya achieve security and peace, and that has been the case since the start of the division, as I told you.
So we're all very hopeful that that the peace that is currently being experienced in Libya continues and develops very positively. And of course, these elections in December are very important to hold that together. So what are the difficulties, what are the hurdles that are being thrown up in the path of these elections?
Well, actually, to start with, elections need the elections legislation to move forward and the constitutional basis. And these two things have been the main, let's say, disagreement point between Eastern Libya and Western Libya again. You know, on the surface, you think that Libya is unified under the unity government. But actually, when you go beneath everything that is happening, you see that there are still division issues that are, you know, sowing the whole, you know, thing. So election law that has been, the election law that has been actually approved by the House of Representatives 2 days ago was done or was passed unilaterally without consultation with the other legislative body in the Libyan government, which is the High Council of State. And this is a violation of the Libyan political agreement and a violation of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum results. So here we have the House of Representatives making an election law on its own to actually satisfy certain bodies and certain entities that and figures that we all know. And I'm not gonna just, you know, ignore the elephant in the room, which is, in this case, Khalifa Haftar. So they're trying to size up the election law to fit Haftar and other East-based, you know, possible or potential candidates. This is a violation, but unfortunately, this election law has been actually hailed and praised by the UN support mission in Libya, which is actually very surprising and shocking. Because you know, the UN should actually monitor the mistakes and the violations and demand that they be corrected. Mm-hmm. But instead, they are siding with the House of Representatives in actually hailing the passing of this election law, which is in violation of the LPDF and the political agreement. So here we have a very massive hurdle and hindrance to holding elections, because now we have over 25 parliament members from inside the parliament in East Libya who say that they have not approved enacting this election law, and the election law was unilaterally approved by the HOR speaker, Aguila Saleh, without going back to them for approval. So now we have a split inside the House of Representatives in the East, and the violation of making the election law between the House of Representatives and the High Council of State. And here we go again to square one in what seems to be another way of, you know, turning things around and, you know, pushing back elections, not holding them on time. And there's so many excuses now for each party, to, especially the East-based parties, to let go with the deadline.
Right, and well, I was just thinking, any uncertainties lead to a dangerous future where people can dispute that black is black and white is white, and this is very precarious. Now, of course, the EU is just one foreign player that's might be involved. The United States is another, and you mentioned Khalifa Haftar, and there are reports that Khalifa Haftar is seeking political lobbyists to support him in the United States, going to liaise with the Biden administration and others in the House of Representatives and the Senate there. How risky is this, that Khalifa Haftar, who was defeated in Libya and had no legitimate role there, is now looking for further support from the United States? Does this pose potential problems for the future?
Well, actually, this is the main threat to the democratic change that we're hoping for. So we have here a war criminal, and he is actually a war criminal, not by my words, by the reports of so many international and legal organizations, who is allowed to have to sign political lobbying contracts in the U.S. with Libyan money. Actually, he's going to pay $1 million for 6 months political lobbying in D.C. for ex-Clinton aide and another House of Representatives aide leader in the U.S. And this is what I was saying. The East camp, let's say, in Libya, is trying to push Haftar no matter what. And again, here we have a situation when we see that the parliament in Libya is actually acting for the sake of one person, not for the sake of the country. So here the U.S. as well as the EU, actually, the U.S. now is allowing someone who is indicted with war crimes, and he is wanted for bringing foreign forces and foreign fighters and mercenaries to Libya, Russian-backed ones and others from African countries like Chad and Sudanese Janjaweed mercenaries. He has brought them to Libya, and this is against the law. So he is wanted for so many cases in that violate the laws inside Libya and outside Libya, and here he is allowed to contract political lobbying experts or politicians in the U.S. without any repercussions and without consequences. And this is actually begs the question of who the U.S. is siding with in this situation. Is it siding with the political change and the democratic process of elections, or is it pushing for a dictator, a tyrant, to reach power through this make-believe elections, these sham elections? If Haftar runs for elections, these elections are not actually very democratic or very free and transparent, because he is a war criminal. He should be tried for the crimes that he has committed or he has ordered. And of course, he led in April a war on the legitimate government, and his war led to destruction, displacement, and killings. So at least he should be disqualified to run for a president. And he is now a warlord. Under him, under his control, there are Russian Wagner Group mercenaries, Chadian mercenaries, Sudanese Janjaweed mercenaries, and what have you. So this is actually a twisted logic that the U.S. is packing, and so is the EU, because the EU has also, as I told you, the EU is not interested in politics as long as its Operation Irene is working at sea. That's what I see.
Well, thank you so much. Just to remind our viewers that Haftar, as a U.S. national, he has dual citizenship. He's subject to several lawsuits in the U.S., including rights violations, extrajudicial killings, torture, and several other war crimes that you've outlined. And while he's claimed that he's immune to these lawsuits, American judges have thrown that immunity out. So America should be looking to their laws and thinking very carefully about who they decide to support and work with.
Absolutely.
Abdulkader, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge and bringing us up to date with the situation in Libya. Thank you. Libya's peace process has stuttered since the unity government was installed amid hold-ups in agreeing how elections should be held. There are even doubts whether the election will take place. However, Libya must reunify its fragmented economy and public finances if it stands any hope of ending a decade of violent division. But moves towards that goal are making slow progress. Indeed, the coming months will show if the elections can be successfully held or not. But for now, let's move on to our next topic to speak about the newly announced government in Lebanon. Lebanon, a country that has gone through more than its fair share of crises in the last few years, has been marred by street protests and confrontations for months. Let's have a look at how the situation has deteriorated over the last year alone. Lebanon has announced the formation of a new government for the first time since the Beirut port explosion, with hopes for a solution to the devastating economic meltdown affecting the country.
Lebanese leaders agreed a new government led by Najib Mikati on Friday, after a year of feuding over cabinet seats that has exacerbated a devastating economic collapse, opening the way to a resumption of talks with the IMF. In televised comments, Mikati's eyes welled up with tears and his voice broke as he described the hardship and emigration inflicted by the crisis, which has forced 3/4 of the population into poverty.
الأم إذا ابنها الكبير ترك البلد بتكون دمعة بعينها وما عندها تقدر تشتري حبة بنادول، حبة أسبرو ما فيها تشتري، ما بتلاقي بالبلد. هالشيء كلنا عارفينه، كلنا حاسينه. الوضع صعب، الوضع صعب كتير، كلنا بنعرف، ولكن مش مستحيل إذا نحن تضامنا كلنا سوا كلبنانيين. نحن اليوم بدنا نحط إيدنا بإيد بعض.
The breakthrough followed a flurry of contacts from France, which has led efforts to get Lebanon's fractious leaders to agree a cabinet and begin reform since last year's catastrophic Beirut port explosion, senior Lebanese political sources said. Mikati and President Michel Aoun signed a decree establishing the government in the presence of Parliament President Nabi Berri. Mikati said divisive politics must be set to one side and that he could not go for talks with the International Monetary Fund only to encounter opposition at home.
وآمل أنه نقدر ننهض بهالحكومة، بآمل أنه نقدر نوصل للي بيشتهيه الناس ونقدر نرجع على القليلة نوقف الانهيار اللي حاصل ونرجع كلياتنا سوا بيد وحدة نقدر نرجع لبنان لعزه ولا بإذن الله.
Lebanon could no longer afford to subsidise goods, such as imported fuel, he said, adding the country did not have the hard currency reserves for such support. Like the outgoing cabinet of Prime Minister Hassan Diab, the new one comprises ministers with technical expertise who are not prominent politicians but have been named by the main parties. The crisis, which came to a head in late 2019, stems from decades of corruption in the state and unsustainable financing.
And I'm now joined live from Tripoli in Lebanon by Jimmy Karim, who's a political activist, and also live from Tripoli in Lebanon by Dr. Samir Al-Hajjaj, who's an academic and activist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today here on the Edge. Jimmy, can I come to you first? What is your reaction to this news that finally a new government has been announced?
Actually, more than a year after the bombing of Beirut seaport that caused the resignation of Prime Minister Hassan Diab, and after more than a month and 14 meetings between the two presidents, Aoun and Mikati, the two parties declared that they reached an agreement to form a new government. Although it appears to the general public and on the surface level that it's a positive development, it's exactly the opposite. I believe the corrupt political class managed to fool once again the Lebanese people and also the international community by the double standards it uses. From one side, we see the PM and behind him the most of the regime constituents pretending to form a government of independent technocrats. But if you dig deeper, it becomes so obvious that all the members are in a way or another affiliated or loyal to the bone to the Lebanese confessional leaders and respective parties they preside. From another side, the political class pretends to have ready-made solution to the crisis. At the same time, it appointed in the government people who engineered the disastrous financial strategies that caused the economic downturn and led the Lebanese people to starvation and almost to Stone Age. In addition, the Prime Minister affirmed that the cabinet represents all the Lebanese, not specific groups. But I don't see where the 2.5 million Lebanese people who took the streets on October 17 to overthrow the corrupt regime are represented. Where is the representation also of women in a predominantly male government with distinction? all components of government are subservient to the majority of the parties in power or their leaders. And the inclusion of some members from the civil society will not erase their hidden loyalty to some leaders or even actually their closeness to some. Therefore, adding several new faces considered as field experts, and some of them, ironically, will work in ministries outside their jurisdictions or expertise, will not be able to make any change, no matter how good and excellent they are. Within a besieged composition from top to bottom, in the best case scenario, the participation of these new faces in the government will contribute to reviving a collapsed regime wanting to bring its people to death and creating division within the civil society and newly created opposition parties caused by, such participation. Finally, I would say that this government will fire the mercy bullet on the people's dreams in a better country. And to make things worse, it will not, alleviate their sufferings, but at the contrary, it will kill the hope of the young Lebanese who are immigrating in masses recently. It's a government that will liquidate what's left of the society, and therefore we as political activists, as people, right? Have to confront it by all means before it will destroy what's left of the country's wealth and public utilities by selling them to those responsible for the current catastrophe we're living in.
Well, right. That's a shocking revelation. Let's come to Samir and ask you, what is your reaction to this new announcement?
Well, I don't have a very different reaction. I cannot agree more with what Jimmy has said. The situation in Lebanon needs a different approach. But very sadly, the same political establishment that led us for this catastrophic financial and economic crisis is forming the same government and the same plans for the future. This political establishment has took 13 months to form a government. It showed how irresponsible it is. This political establishment that is responsible of this economic crisis, of the currency crisis, and also on the Beirut blast, we cannot have any high expectations towards this new government. Although there are some good names, but overall, it is also the same approach. We are still using the same approach, and we cannot expect but negative results from this new government. I really hope that actually this new government can have different results. But actually, what we can see that this political establishment is using the same tools. They are aiming to extending the life cycle of this political elite, of this ruling elite, by doing a rebranding for their faces with the new ministers who can change the negative consequences of the economic crisis. Lebanon right now is facing one of the most serious challenges and crises over the time in the history. And this crisis cannot be solved with this government. Very sadly, the prime minister is an ex-prime minister who didn't provide any positive results in the past. So why should we expect him to provide us some new inputs and some new insights? Same goes for the president of the country, who actually predicted that we are going to the hell in this country. So why should we predict a better result right now? Same approach will lead for same results. Very sadly, we will not expect better results from this political establishment.
Well, we all have great hopes for Lebanon, but it seems from both of you that the hopes, the anticipation of a new government isn't what Lebanon really needs at this time. Jimmy, we keep hearing about how the political elites are bringing the country to ruin. How is it that that this can be changed? Because as Samir's just clearly said, if you keep doing the same things, you get the same results. How can Lebanon find a change, do you think?
Finding a change is go through finding a new political class through the elections that's going to take place next year. And with the preparation that the civil society are putting and the efforts are putting in that regard, I hope the civil society will have a chance in electing members to the parliament and thus participating in power and initiating that change. With what's happening with the current political class, there is no hope of things changing in the right direction. But at the contrary, just like I said in my introduction, what's going to happen is we're going to put in more difficulties, in more challenges, because who caused the problem in the past 15 or 30 years are still sitting around the table making decisions. Those who made, the economic crisis or caused the economic crisis are still making decisions and believing that their strategies will work on the long term. I believe there is a disconnect between the current political class and what's happening on the ground, what's happening on the streets, despite the fact that people are tired and they're not being able to protest because they're busy looking, for food. They're busy looking for financial means to sustain themselves. They are so against the current political class, and any change in the future cannot become a reality without changing the current faces within in power for the last 15 or 30 years.
Samir, but can Lebanon wait until next year to hold elections and change the face of the politicians? We know very well on this programme the dire situation that Lebanon finds itself in, the 90% drop in value of the currency, the lack of fuel supplies, the lack of electricity, medicine, and so on. Can Lebanon survive until next year?
That's true. And yesterday, actually, one of the biggest example how this political establishment is irresponsible. The current government launched the cash card program, which will be active for 1 year and will provide only $25 for each individual in a household, with maximum payout of $126 per family.
Can I just stop you there and just ask you,
Samir,
can I just ask you, this $25, when I was reading this, I was confused. Is this $25 a month or $25 total?
No, actually $25 per month. That's
right,
true.
Okay. It's still very little.
$25 that can do nothing, actually. And this cash program will do very little to help the nation and will increase the inflation rate and will only shore up the influence of the political establishment, because this political establishment is going to use these cash cards as political tool in the next elections. The only effective solution that can make sense on a financial and social level would be a full-fledged, comprehensive recovery plan, including some reforms with a strong social protection framework. Otherwise, every decisions are made would be only patchworks to extend the life of this political establishment. We need a fully-fledged recovery plan that is governed by independent people who are really technocrat, who are really in a good place to recover the country from the crisis. Otherwise, all of the proposed solutions from this political establishment will not have any significant impact on the life of the Lebanese citizen.
So this, as you say, the cash card program, which has just been announced, could be used as a political tool. But with 3/4 of the population already living in poverty, any additional income, I'm sure, is something that they would welcome. But as you say, Jimmy, let me ask you, what is it that the prices are continuing to go up, and will this cash injection, so to speak, or cash supplement actually make a difference, or will, as Samir suggests, it just increase inflationary pressures?
I would say it's going to add, the average family income on the short term, but on the long term, with no plans, as just like my colleague Samer has mentioned, with no actual plan, recovery plan, nothing is going to happen on the long term. So what people will gain by getting the $25 are going to lose it when the gas prices goes up and the food prices goes up. So this $25 will not only be a way to survive, but only a tool to calm down the population, the Lebanese population, before the next election. It's really ironic that the current political class are using money that they do not own to distribute it to people in such a way by promising them salary increases on top of those $25, especially public servants, by promising them salary increases and giving them incentives or privileges from money they don't have in the Treasury Department. The situation, the direction of the situation is taking a downturn, and it's going to be worse and worse. And just like I mentioned, I'm fully, I would say, pessimistic about what this government can do in such a tough time in the history of Lebanon.
So, Samir, what is the way forward in the period between now and the elections next year? If the cash card program is a political ploy that's really not going to do any benefit, does this need direction from outside of the country to pull your leaders up and to force the elites to actually do something for the good of all the people in Lebanon?
Definitely, the Lebanese case is very complicated.
Sure.
And the regional and international players can play a very important role. Nevertheless, I think that there are some internal players who do not like to see a recovery for this country. I can say it very clearly. A country that's facing the most serious crisis in the history was not having a government for 13 months. So we can see that there is irresponsibility. Right now, what we expect is a strong social protection framework. People are dying from in the streets. People are becoming more and more poor. We are having very high percentages of unemployment. We need a very clear and specific short-term plan to protect our communities, our marginalized communities that are facing for a long time some serious challenges when it comes to the economic and social development. That's why right now the solution should tackle three important areas. One, the banking sector. We cannot talk about economic recovery in the presence of the current banking sector that is failing big time. Two, we need to protect the people with a very clear and precise social protection framework. And finally, we need to reactivate and remobilize the economic sectors by having some new liquidities, some new investments, foreign or from the diaspora. These will not be happen unless we have a government that has a confidence. And as you can see, this new form government does not have the confidence of the people, does not have the confidence of the IFF, the International Financial Foundations and institutions. So right now, we need to protect the communities because the Lebanese case is very complex. The Lebanese people are facing a catastrophic economic challenges. And these cannot be happened by issuing cash cards by here or promising people to deliver some food from there. We need a full-fledged recovery plan governed by independent and technocratic people. I hope that this will happen very soon because the new form government will not be able to deliver the results that we aim for.
Well, clearly, Lebanon and its people don't need gimmicks. It needs It doesn't need a band-aid, it needs a full operation to bring the patient back to health. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both so much for joining us today, and I hope that your country's leaders listen to people like yourselves to hear what they need to hear about how things need to move forward. Thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. The crisis in Lebanon, which has forced 3/4 of the population into poverty, is the biggest threat to Lebanon's stability since the 1975-1990 civil war. However, the new government opens the way to a possible resumption with talks with the International Monetary Fund, although both of our guests find that possibility somewhat remote. The coming weeks will show if the economy can move in a positive direction under the new government. For now, let's move to our final topic to speak about Turkey's successful fight against the coronavirus pandemic. A new chapter has started in Turkey's coronavirus pandemic response in a bid to limit the movement of people without jabs. Our following infographic has more. 81% of Turkey's population aged over 18 has received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, while 63% of the adult population has been fully vaccinated against coronavirus.
Turkey's vaccination program is continuing in full swing to immunize the Turkish population against the coronavirus. Turkey has so far administered over 100 million coronavirus vaccine jabs as part of a nationwide immunization campaign.
Covid-19'a karşı toplum bağışıklığı için gelin aramızda aşıda birlik ve beraberlik bağı kuralım. Aşı risklere karşı güven, yarınlar için özgürlük duygusudur. Aşı olan riski herkes için azaltır. Sizleri her birimizi kuşatan aşıda birlik ve beraberliğe davet ediyorum.
51 million people have received their first dose of the vaccine, while second vaccine doses have been given to over 39.4 million people. Most COVID-19 vaccines are administered in 2 doses, so the number of shots given is not the same as the number of individuals fully vaccinated. Data from the Health Ministry shows that the number of people who have received their third COVID-19 vaccine doses has crossed the 9.2 million mark. People can choose which vaccine, Sinovac or BioNTech, they would like to receive when their turn comes.
100 milyon doz aşıyı tamamladığımız bugün sizlere önemli bir müjdem daha var. Yerli aşımız Turkovac, acil kullanım onayına müracaat edebilecek aşamaya geldi. Bir tesiste üretimine başladığımız Turkovac aşımız bugün ikinci bir tesiste daha seri üretilecek altyapıya ulaştı. Onay alması halinde Ekim ayı içinde seri üretime geçeceğiz.
81% of Turkey's population aged over 18 has received at least one dose of the vaccine, while 63% of the adult population has been fully vaccinated against the deadly virus. Turkey is scheduled to achieve herd immunity this autumn, depending on vaccine supplies and people's willingness to get vaccinated. More than 5.5 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines have been given worldwide so far, and Turkey currently ranks 8th on the list. Turkey has recorded 58,000 COVID-19 deaths and 6.5 million infections since the start of the pandemic.
More than 5.5 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines have been given worldwide so far, and Turkey currently ranks 8th on the list. We once again emphasize that vaccination is the only way to end the pandemic. Our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. And before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story, shared with the hashtag Lebanon. And here's what you've been saying on Twitter about Lebanon. Kamal al-Tayyara said the time it took and the way it was presented according to sects and the quality of the ministers, everything about it was disgusting. Runaway Lebanon. And Jason Casper says new Lebanon government finally formed after more than a year of political vacuum overseen by caretaker cabinet, ready perhaps to take on the challenge of halting an economic collapse. Good news finally, but now for the details. And Ziad Khalil says, honoured to see Judge Abbas Halibi as Minister of Education, a true patriot and self-achiever who has served his country with endless passion and freedom of conscience. There is hope, Lebanon. And let's now take a look at our video of the day, which tells the story of a Syrian refugee family in Lebanon that's struggling to meet the most basic of human needs.
Here in Beirut, I've just had an opportunity to talk with a family, husband, wife, 6 children, with one of the younger children with Down syndrome. And the situation for them is quite desperate.
الشغل خف، الوضع كله تغير، المعيشة غليت، كل شيء غلي، ما بتحط ايدك على شيء إلا ما صار حقه 5 بال.
No electricity, no water. Their days are filled. He goes to work, he spends 22 hours. His wife is spent taking care of their youngest who needs special care.
عندي بنت اسمها إسراء مع مرض متلازم الداون، عمرها 10 سنوات، يعني بدها مراكز صحية تعتني فيها، بدها لها وضع خاص. البنت وضعها في البيت صعب كتير. يعني هذا عبء كبير عليها. الله يعطيها ألف عافية، والله العظيم هي صبر أيوب، هي صبر أيوب.
This conversation is one of the saddest I've had in a long time, because you can always find just a little kernel of hope. I suppose in this family, the dedication that the parents have to find a future for their children, that's their number one priority. Education is their number one priority. That is the hope. But right now, they don't see that future coming to life anytime soon. That's what's so sad.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boyns. Stay tuned. We'll be back next time with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.